Kia ora, everyone.
Kia ora.
So thank you for the many of you that keep coming back for more and bear with me for the first 5 minutes because I will repeat what you've heard before. And thanks to the new people, we really appreciate your interest. So I'm Marie, I work for Nelson City Council and I'm the Climate Change Adaptation Advisor. And today we are very lucky to have Alexandre Magnan, who is freshly arrived in Nelson, French researcher, social scientist, and arrived in September and working for COSFRA. And Alex is also a IPCC, so International Panel of Climate Change lead author for adaptation, climate change adaptation. So I feel very, very lucky to have you here with us. I'm working in the region. It's precious to have all this experience and knowledge at arm's length, really. So I will start just for a few minutes, give some context, and then Alex will take over. All right, so why adaptation? Because adaptation is a global issue, so even though we do need to mitigate our emissions here in Nelson, we have a responsibility to do this towards ourselves, our children, next generations, and the natural world. But at the end of the day, what we need to pay attention to when we think about adaptation is those two curves. So the blue one is the atmospheric CO2, and then the black one is black one is emissions, and the blue one is the concentration of CO2 into the atmosphere. And as we can see, it just keeps increasing. That means that the need for adaptation is also increasing. And if I may point out the little squiggle at the end, that was COVID. And I'm not saying we need to lock people up to mitigate our emissions, but what it tells me is that slowing down is something that will matter at some point, and I'm pretty sure everybody in the room could do with a bit of slowing down. We certainly could. Right, next one. So the impact of this increase of CO2 in the atmosphere, the concentration is very varied. This is it's a very busy infographic, but it's in the climate change strategy, so please have a look at the details. In a nutshell, we're gonna see weather patterns changing, whether it's our seasons shifting, whether it's changes that happen quite fast and are a bit chaotic, more extreme events, more frequent, and that's more droughts and fires, and this will have flow-on effects to more or less everything locally, especially the natural environment and our built environment and the people, and ultimately that has a cost, financial costs that we need to bear. Next one, please. And we also need to think, because the infographics before talks about the direct impact, the things we will experience here, but there is more and more research done on to understanding what's called the transboundary climate impact, which is what happens everywhere, anywhere in the world. We are so connected that it ends up flowing here and often takes the shape of a financial cost again, which means that if we don't pay attention to those now, that could become quite chronic over time, because climate change happens faster in some places in the world, particularly in the Arctic Circle and tropical regions and dry regions. So next slide, please. So we need to pay attention to those because they will touch about everything. The resources we have access to, food, we import a lot of food, industrial supply chain, that's the most obvious, the financial markets are extremely sensitive to climate-related shocks, infectious diseases, of course, human mobility, we might see some migrations. For now, most climate migrations happen within countries, but at some point they will spill over to moving to different places, and then livelihoods and well-being, because we also sell a lot of things to overseas consumers, so if they're impacted, we are. All right, next one. One thing that is at the top of a lot of people, top of mind for a lot of people, is issues of insurability, of course, especially in a place where we're exposed to flooding. And I didn't put pictures of the events in Auckland and Hawke's Bay or Nelson in 2022 because we all have the images in mind, I'm sure. But the North Island events from 2023 cost between 9 and 14 billion. And then the one in Nelson was 77 million. If those happen too often, it will drain our resources, and we won't be able to do adaptation in a proactive and anticipatory way. And then a little quote, I can't remember where I picked this up, but it's stuck in my mind. If you don't know your climate risk, trust that your insurer does. They absolutely do. And so it's important that all of us as members of the community, we know our risk, and we need to show insurers that we are doing something about it. Not only we know, but we are trying to reduce those risks. And if we do that, we can work with them and avoid insurers just not willing to insure us anymore, which we really want to avoid. And so as we can see with the curve that I showed at the beginning, emissions increase. We are not really adapting now. So there is a growing gap between where we need to be and where we are. And not only a gap in action, but also a gap in the resources we've got access to be able to run adaptation responses. So we need to close that gap. And it's not only financial, it's political, and it's technical. So yeah, this is a bit of a concerning one. You see? The UN, the United Nations Environment Programme, has been publishing since 2014 a report called the Adaptation Gap Report. And I've just put the last three here, if you want to just a few more clicks. So that's this year, and that's therefore 2023. And they are ramping up the warnings here, and it's not a very easy reading. The first one was too little, too slow. Then I found the picture pretty striking when I saw it. Under-financed and under-prepared. Here they're ramping up again, come hell and high water. So it's trying to capture the attention of a lot of policymakers and businesses and getting those conversations going, which is what we are doing here. So very grateful to be able to be in this space to do that. Next one, and yeah, just a quick definition of adaptation with a framing that is not based on risk, because we know that talking to people who don't know about climate change, talking about risk is not conducive to a good conversation, so it's framed a bit differently. It's responding to current and future climate disruptions together in a way that meets the needs of all communities and enables the natural world, people and the economy to thrive. And I've got a few characteristics here. So adaptation is first and foremost a collective project. There is we need to combine our resources and our powers. We all have a little bit of power, but we don't have the whole power to really change the game. So altogether, it's based on our shared values and vision. We need that. We need to intentionally create a vision for our community together and include everybody. It's okay to have a lot of people thinking differently, and it can work. Next one is, it's a different way of thinking about the future. I think for those of you who were at the Jonathan's Boston talk on Friday on trust, climate change, and trust, science and climate change, really showed that there is a crisis in terms of the general public having faith in what science is telling us. So there is a lot of uncertainty, so we often get lost in that debate about what's sure and what's not sure. But there are ways to think differently, so we can work with the uncertainty and still get somewhere. And at some point I'll share all of this in more detail when we really start adaptation planning. It's a process, so that goes along with a different way of thinking. It's a new way of having processes to be able to think about it. And then the last one, it's an opportunity. For many, many years, anyone I was saying opportunity on climate change, I was like, no. There is none, but it's not true. There are opportunities, and that's what I was saying before. It's the opportunity to intentionally design our communities in a way that fulfills everybody's needs. And that's me, so I will pass this on to Alexandre, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm used to talk to scientific audiences. So it's very interesting and important for me today to have the opportunity to talk with real people. So Marie told you that I'm new in New Zealand. I spent a lot of my life in Réunion Island, which is a French other seas territories in the Indian Ocean and in mainland France, so in the European context. And I am discovering different things here. But I'm working for a long time on Pacific Islands, but from Europe. So it's more convenient today. And so I spent many years working on this IPCC report, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the big scientific institution supported by the United Nations to develop some state of knowledge on climate change on the mitigation side and also on the adaptation side. And I contributed to the different reports you were mentioning before. But at one point, I was very happy to do this kind of work. But at one point, I realized that the information we have from the scientific literature is mainly on adaptation, is in some way still very theoretical, and we lack grounded information, the information coming from the local level. And so this is the context. And the topic is around assessing adaptation, because we have a big question at the international level, and I think the local level can help answer this question at the international level. The big question is, where do we stand in terms of adaptation? Mary showed you some graphs around greenhouse gases emissions. We have a reporting system to know where we stand on climate mitigation at the local level, then we aggregate at the national level, and then we aggregate at the international level. So we have a tracking system which shows that we are not on track. Okay, but still, we have a reporting system. On adaptation, we don't have that. And it's a problem, because if you say that we are on a path to limit greenhouse gases emissions and global warming to +2 degrees, for example, you don't know if these 2 degrees at the global level by the end of the century is sustainable or not, because you don't know if you are able to adapt to a world which is 2 degrees more than the pre-industrial level, so more or less than today. So I started to work on this idea of how to track adaptation progress, okay? It's very hard to measure, because when you talk about greenhouse gases emissions, you can rely that and you can connect that to energy, to transport, and some quantitative information. On adaptation, as Mary showed you, it's very broad, and it's hard to have quantitative measures of adaptation. So it's really a methodological challenge, but you will see how I propose to treat it. And quantitative indicators, they are usually, you have a bunch of scientists taking some statistics at the national level, playing with Excel tables, with numbers, and say, okay, in adaptation we are there. But the statistics, they miss a lot of information. For example, community participation. It's not registered through statistics, or the way people perceive risk. It's not really registered through statistics. And so the quantitative methods are not very useful. Well, they are useful, but they are not standalone methods. We need to develop some complementary approaches. And I developed a lot of things around this kind of thing, the structured expert judgment. I developed this first for the IPCC and then for different things. Structured because it's not I don't know if you say that in English, wet finger. It's not, what do you think? 0.2, 0.3, and I mean, it's organized, okay? And expert because I developed that mainly with scientists, but now I realize, and this is why I came here in New Zealand and in the Pacific in general, that experts are not necessarily only scientists. In a way, at the Nelson City Council level, you are all experts, because you have an experience of the problems, of the risks, of the solutions, and so on. So, next slide. Sorry, I said I won't speak too much, but this is what I call the gap track for Global Adaptation Progress Tracker, because I developed this for the United Framework Convention on Climate Change. So the purpose was global, but when I will show you the slides, keep in mind that you can apply this exactly at the local level, or at the national level, or at a regional level. The tool has been designed to be applied across scales. And I started to think, okay, if we want to know where we stand on adaptation, maybe we just need to start with asking some simple questions instead of trying to see where are the data and the statistics and blah blah. So, and to me there are 6 questions, and if we are able to answer these six questions, then we are able to give a comprehensive understanding of where we stand on adaptation. So, what do we know about current and future climate risks? So the things Mary was talking about. Don't forget about the black things. This is just detail, but the big headings. So what do we know on climate risk? What do we know about plans that are dedicated or supporting adaptation and that are really implemented on the ground? You have, in France, you have a national plan. More or less it's empty. It's just high level things and you don't know exactly what does it mean for the local level. So focusing on the local level, what is really here in terms of planning? The actions we are taking in the name of climate risk reduction, what are they? I mean, do we have a mapping, for example, of all the adaptation solutions that are implemented at the Nelson City Council or at the national level? We need to understand what is done in the name of adaptation, and if what is done in the name of adaptation is really adaptation. Sometimes you can have a rural community in a small island in French Polynesia, for example. I'm working a lot there. The adaptation solution promoted by international funders is build a seawall around the island, and people will be safe from sea level rise. But actually, there are many implications of that, and in the end, it appears that a seawall, if you take a long time scale, several decades, is just a bad idea. Okay, so you need to understand that. You also need to understand where are the capacities, financial of course, but institutional, technical, and so on. You need to know if you are really reducing climate risk or not. Do we have evidence from the ground that we are reducing climate risk? This is a huge scientific question. Nobody really has the answer. So this is an important thing. And the last petal, I call that the flower. It's easier than the gap. The last petal is around, do we have a very long-term perspective on climate adaptation? Climate adaptation, Mary showed you that. It's not a matter of being ready in 10 years or 15 years. I mean, it's a matter of being ready at the century scale. I know it's very far from us today, but this is really the challenge with adaptation, okay? Of course, being safe in 10 years, of course, but again, if you are safe in 10 years because you build a seawall around all the islands, I'm talking about not New Zealand, it would be a huge seawall, but around a small island, you are ready to face sea level rise and the risks from sea level rise in the 10, 20 years. But in 2100, for example, not sure you're safe. So you need to also have this very long-term perspective. Next slide. Sorry, I'm talking too much. But basically, the exercise is very simple. And I wanted to present this to you today because I think people who are not scientists, who are not used to develop this kind of method, can be involved in this kind of exercise, and it would be super interesting. So the basic idea is to collect expert views and have discussions between experts. And once again, you could be the experts. Mary, if we do an exercise at the institutional level, can be an expert. I can be an expert on the scientific aspects and so on. We are all experts in a way. But that needs to be structured because once again, it's not about blah, blah. I mean, we need structured discussions. And how we do that, if you go back to the previous slide, sorry, you see that there are scores. The idea is to answer these different questions using a scoring system. It's very simple. Adaptation actions, where we stand. Do you think, as an individual expert, but then at the group level, that we are not developing anything, we are developing things but they are not so relevant, or we are developing many things that are very relevant in terms of adaptation? So this is basically the scoring system. If you go to the next slide, you need for each of the petals to have a clear description of the scores. You need, all of us, if we want to do this exercise, we need to understand the same thing around what a score 2 means for the question on adaptation action, for example. What a score 3 means. Otherwise, we will have different perceptions of the scores, and so it won't work. So you need to do that. To describe the scores, you need several rounds of assessment, because maybe we will do an exercise. Today we won't. We don't have time. But imagine, we do an exercise, you put some scores on the different petals, then you come back, you discuss together, and you realize that, oh, you missed this point. Indeed, when you thought about this scoring for this petal, you didn't thought about that. Okay, so I will revise my score because you're right. I mean, it's rather 3 than 2. I was misleading. So you need this discussion, and the process of discussing together is far more important than the final scores in the end. And to each score, when you do a scientific exercise, at least what I've done, you need a clear narrative to be able to communicate to the other outside of the group why you came up with this picture. Next slide. So, Larry, I'm trying to go fast. And the interesting thing with that is that means that if you do this kind of exercise, even if you don't have quantitative data, it's not a problem, because you have an expertise of what's happening in Nelson when there is a flood, for example. Your views, your expertise are not necessarily collected and published in the scientific literature or transformed into a kind of quantitative information, but still you have this knowledge. So this kind of scoring system can help, because we discuss together, can help bring these different types of knowledge together. This is about creating a shared language. Anyway, and next slide, sorry.
It's not actually got time.
Yeah, but still. I can speak hours and hours around that, so I put myself under some kind of pressure. And what I've done for the using this kind of tool for the international level was to say, okay, we have this assessment of adaptation country by country and then at the global level based on national statistics. And national statistics are averages of the situation. I'm sure some national statistics doesn't reflect exactly what is happening in Nelson, and probably what is happening in Nelson is a bit different from what is happening in another area in the country. So national statistics are good. The UNEP adaptation gap report Mario was talking about is building on these national statistics, but my point was it's not enough. We need to know what is happening really on the ground, okay? So what I've done is that I gathered a bunch of scientists, we were 20 I think so, and I asked them, they were from different regions in the world, there were 2 people from New Zealand, and I asked them to apply the flower, so the tool, at the local level. So I think for New Zealand, if I well remember, one case was in Hawke's Bay and the other one was in I don't have the name yet, but there were 2 cases, and we have been able to collect the information for 60 cases around the world. Next slides, and we considered both megacities, small-sized cities, rural areas with economic activities, and rural areas with no economic activity, but for example, very important cultural things. We did that for coasts, because this is my area of expertise, and we have been able to come up with this kind of thing, for example. And the picture is quite interesting, because when you collect all these case studies, because you have the scoring system, you can aggregate them at one point, and you can come up with a number at the global level, which has a lot of limitations, but for the audience I was working for, it was very useful. And interestingly, you come up with this number, which is halfway This is very, very, very poor adaptation. We are really not on track. We are super on track. Actually, we are in the middle, and it was quite surprising for me, because I was thinking that we were rather here at the global level, but no, not so bad, not so good. Big step ahead, but not so bad. This is another way to display the information. So you have the 6 petals of the flower, so it was easier to show a circle than a flower in the end. But you can see the shaded area is showing the gaps, and the non-shaded area is showing the progress, what we are really doing. And you see that it can help you showing that on some aspects you are quite good, on others you are really weak, quite good, but room for improvement. Anyway, we won't go into the detail, of course, but it helps you setting some priorities and to discuss what you want to do with your territory. This is just a picture of global coastal adaptation, of course, but imagine it can be Nelson. Next slide, I think that's more or less the... So yeah, just to come back on some lessons learned for me around this. So it's important to have tools that allow us to have a common understanding of the problem and of the solution. For some people, seawalls are very good. For others, seawalls are a nightmare. So what is the compromise? What is the consensus? Because of the previous slide, it shows you the priorities, where you stand, what are the gaps, and what you could do in the future to improve the level of adaptation of your territory. That means, and because the scoring system is basically about discussing together different views, it allows you to share some ideas and to build a shared project. And adaptation is really about the shared project, okay? Because you will be adapted to climate change when you will have a clear understanding of the level of risk that you are ready to support or not. Adaptation is about that. It is about discussing what is tolerable and what is intolerable for a territory. So you need a shared project, and it allows you to be proactive. Next slide, I think that's, yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, my fault if you rushed.
No.
I might just briefly, I was going to present the process that Council is using to go through adaptation. And you see, if you want to go back to the slide diagram, yeah, okay, cool. So in Nelson, just, I would say that we are pretty consistent with what's happening at the global level. So we are pretty good at understanding the risk. I mean, it's still high level, but we've got a risk assessment report that is just finished. It's a beautiful document. We can't wait to share it with the community. But from the conversations that I've had with other practitioners around the country, this is, at the end of the day, also an easy part. I don't want to be too much of a killjoy, but this is the easy part. Where it becomes tricky is engaging enough of a representative sample of the community to make plans. We don't want just the people who are thinking the same. We want a big panel of different thinking. And then there is another roadblock, and we are starting to think about it. It's between the plan and the implementation. Just like Alex was saying about the national plan in France, and then on the ground there is nothing. It's diluted, it's lost. So understanding the barriers to this moving on from one stage to another is quite critical. And so yeah, we are working, and the beauty of New Zealand, it's a small country, all the researchers and practitioners know each other, so there is a lot of conversation happening to try and anticipate the issues and what do we need to do today to enable those things a bit later. Yeah, and that's it. And if you want, so the slide on the big wheel that I showed before, I won't waffle, time for questions would be great. On the website, on the Nelson City Council website, there is information on where we are at. And I'll be out in the community in October, fingers crossed, to start having all those conversations. So thanks so much, Alex, for
Yeah, there's definitely time for questions, so I've got 10 minutes for questions for Alex and Marie, if you guys want to.
Please do.
Marie, so we've had your presentation last week and Alex's today, which are both fairly theoretical. At a really kind of practical level, what are some of the things that Nelson City needs to be thinking about in terms of adaptation? What are some of the hard choices we have to make?
Oh gosh. So there is one thing that I want to avoid, a word that I want to avoid in that space is the word solution. There is no solution, there are just options and trade-offs. So yes, we always need to make some choices. We are putting together an adaptation options catalog. So it's not all in the hands of council, obviously, it's everybody plays a part. That's in the strategy, it really highlights this. Every section of the community can do something. We have more than 200 options in there. And we didn't look just at council's option, we looked at different agencies, stakeholders and partners, and we know that we go and tap on people's shoulders at the moment and say, can we have a chat? What do you think of those options? What would you put in there? And then it will allow us to kind of know who do we work with to implement those options. And I didn't quite address your question about the hard choices. Sometimes it will be hard choices, sometimes not so hard. We will find out what they are exactly when we sit down with a group of people. And this is where we need to also acquire quite some skills about being able to have conversation with people who really disagree with us and still be.
I presume we've got properties that are in high-risk areas, in floodplains.
Yeah, we do. We do. And so there will be conversations about retreat. Yes, we need those conversations, and I don't have a preconceived idea of what's going to happen, but we are waiting for some direction from central government because we need to know how much money do we have to buy some properties out ahead of the problem and not after, because the 14 properties here in Nelson were bought out after the floods. We can do it once, can we do it twice, 3 times, 4 times? I'm not sure about that. So yeah, in anticipation would be good, but that's probably the hardest conversation. There are easiest conversation to have first. Yeah. Jean-Paul?
Just a note there was a survey recently asking what people were most concerned about in the top 5 things, and climate change didn't appear in the top 5. It's that economy. So one question is, what do we mean by the economy in this? Because I think there's something that is different to different people.
Yep.
And it comes up in everything, so well, we're going to look after the economy, but what actually is that? But also, it seems like we've got an enormous way to go in terms of engagement with people and understanding the problem, understanding what is coming. And until we've got that, it feels like we're
Alex, maybe.
Yeah, on the economy, I won't be able to answer your question, but on the second one, I mean, this is where I started to develop this kind of tool, and now I want to apply it at a more local level, because I'm convinced that we need this conversation between the people, between the private sector, and also between with the local institutions. I mean, and this is why when I say we are all experts, this is important to get the viewpoints of all these. The population is legitimate in saying things. The councils are legitimate also. The private actors also. I mean, there are a lot of legitimacies and not only one. So we need to get around the table to discuss this kind of thing. And in a conflicting way, yes, of course. I mean, it will be about making hard choice at one point. So I think this collecting people's view and people in general is, well, to me that's of course there are institutional processes to implement the things, and it's not so simple. You have to look at regulations, make regulations evolve and so on, of course. But still, what do we want? And this is why I talked about the share project. What do we want for Nelson City Council, for example, in 2100? That's a question. If you don't know where you want to go, I mean, it's quite hard to go there. Okay. So.
Yeah. And on the economy, we had, if you think about the transboundary risk and everything that's happening elsewhere will impact the economy. And there was someone in the room last week on Monday who was really worried about the economy, like what's and jobs and what are we going to do. And I think, again, maybe I'm a bit of an idealist. I need to in this job. If you're not an idealist, I will be very depressed. I think at the local level, if we consider those transboundary risks, we have to sit down with the main economic actor, would be anyone who produces something or imports something to make goods and services, and be coordinated. That we need, if a business says, I see those risks and here's the actions I'm taking, and we know that it's impacting other businesses around, they need to approach them ahead of time and say, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm going to do. Can we work together? So we are working at pace together, and we align our things. And I don't know if that answers your question.
Sort of.
Sort of. So it's such a big question, the economic question. And what do you count in the economy? I mean, here I'm just thinking, what's bringing livelihood? Basically,
it worries me because it's always a thing that's put in front to say yes, but we can't do this because of the economy. And I think a lot of people don't really know what they're actually. What is this thing that you keep talking about? You know.
Yeah.
And how will this affect it? Could our standard of living could improve through the things that we're doing here? You know, that kind of conversation we don't seem to be having. It's this stumbling block that we keep coming across.
It will impact the economy whether we want it or not.
Yes, that's right.
So I heard someone say once, living simply when it's a choice, it's called simple living. If it's imposed, it's called poverty. So same with the economy. If we choose it, we could label things in a way that makes us feel good about what's happening, and if it's imposed, it's rarely perceived as something good.
I just have a quick comment for like the messaging. I think the workshop do really awesome messaging around positivity around like adaptation and mitigation topics. Have you heard of them? The workshop, they're really good to look at.
Framing for community.
For narratives and talking about complex issues, and the narrative has a really good.
And I guess this is very useful for anyone here who is talking to people there, whether it's their family, their neighbors, or anyone about climate change and especially adaptation. That document, it's called How to Talk to Communities About Risk. And it shows us a snapshot of where society today is at in terms of framings and what's welcome and what's not welcome as a framing. And the risk framing is not helpful right now, sadly. We can't. It's hard to talk about risk.
Is that because people feel as though they don't have any way to avoid that risk? Why is talking about risk difficult and not helpful?
It's because it's because it's frightening, and it will just challenge the way we built our societies over the last 200 years, or maybe here a bit less, but the last decades, the way we develop buildings at the coast, for example, it can continue like that. I mean, sea level rise shows that you can. So it's difficult because you say you are a property manager, you are developing some business with building houses at the coast. It's quite good for making money, and it how economics works today. But then you come with your IPCC lens, and you say you can't do that anymore. I mean, you will have to shift. And so the person say, okay, when will I have to shift? By the end of the century, it will become the second half of the century, it will become very tricky. Second half of the century, okay. So, and I had some feedbacks from decision makers saying, okay, come back in 2049, and we discuss what to do in just after 2050. And so it's frightening because it calls for making very hard choices, and or confirm that you are on the right track in some ways.
But the risk framing has always been a problem for the last 50 years. When first the first IPCC reports, the discussion went endlessly about, are you sure? Are you sure it's a real risk? And people waited, we'll wait for more data to see that we do something to mitigate our emissions. 50 years later, emissions just keep rising.
Okay, but you conflated two things there. One is you can't build there. The second is you must shift. Those are two very different things. So we should be talking about risk, where we need to talk about avoiding putting new buildings in places that are high risk. We shouldn't allow that to happen now.
Yeah.
So we must talk about risk in those situations.
Yeah, of course, you need to. But if you start with saying there is a risk, it's a dead end conversation.
dead end, yeah.
Often people say, okay, it's too massive.
It's too big.
I will do something else because not today. It's very too massive discussion. I
Well,
can have this.
We have to find a way to talk about those situations where we don't want people to build and put regulations in place to not allow it. Otherwise, we're just building cost into
Yeah.
our.
This is where
Future
national directions and policy really comes in on planning, and we've got a planner in the room that I'm sure understands that really well. For the avoiding the new risk, I think yes, absolutely, regulation is the way to go, and also having our decision maker, politicians, understanding that developing the city and growing the city is not possible necessarily in the same way it used to be, but for retreating. That is a different business. To approach the people who are physically at risk and their entire assets, gathered over a lifetime, that is where we want to approach very gently and build relationships.
I think Aaron had a question.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's right. I am interested in the transboundary risks because we commonly, when we talk about adaptation, it's more on the primary physical risks like inundation and rainfall events. It seems to me that if we seek to minimise risk in those transboundary areas, there's some overlap with mitigation work.
Yes,
especially
absolutely.
if we consider being more self-sufficient in energy and transport, food production, to lower the transboundary risks. We're also moving to systems that are lower emission, perhaps.
Yes.
So can you comment on to what degree that's at the front of people's minds? Are people working on that and say, hey, these are, like at a regional level, will we draw these two sort of circles and see where they intersect and say, hey, we'll get a lot of good return from working on these areas because they cover both?
So it's kind of the idea of, may I take this one? Yeah. Kind of the re-industrialization to some degree. So it calls for really difficult topics. So if we think about our electronics, we all, the mining question, right? The mining question in New Zealand. I'm not for it in absolute, but I'm thinking in terms of adaptation. There is a discussion to have about do we want to do some mining, trying to do properly as clean as we can. Also, when we poo in our backyard, we tend to be a bit more tidy than if we go and poo in someone else's backyard. Sorry for the language, but if we do it here, so this is a question we need to have. Building some regional alliances, we can't be fully self-sufficient. It's not a very reasonable thing to do or think or try. It would be too expensive and it would take like 50 years. It took 50 years to shift our industries in the East, in China and wherever else. And the second question that I was, what was it? Yes, in terms of those transboundary risk, one of the major risks is the hyper-optimization of all of the systems. It's not so much the globalization itself, it's so tight, it's so optimized that every time you have a little shock, it just ripples everywhere because there is no flexibility. So another conversation that's hard to have, it's redundancy. We need to have systems that are a little bit wasteful in some respect, in the sense that you need to maybe overcapitalize a little bit or overstaff a little bit or have stocks and things like this. I think that's one big component to resilience.
Yeah, and I think the mining question is valid, but there are easier topics like energy and
this one is
transport
a terrible one.
to think about, and perhaps that'd be a national level resilience and security issue, like energy security.
Energy security, particularly fuel, like oil and gas is a real thing. And if you go and dig into the ministries of defense and things like this.
Yeah, and just seeing the problems that the UK and Western Europe have had trying to free themselves from Russian gas.
Yeah.
And the massive amount the government's had to subsidise winter heating bills. And if you throw into the mix slowing down the Gulf Stream, for example, like that's, I think the government will be doing anything they can to avoid that cost and becoming a bit more self-sufficient. And at some stage that could be a big factor here as well.
Yeah. But a relocalization of a lot of our productive systems and economies makes a lot of sense. And the slowing down as well, just a slowing down.
Oh yeah,
Just,
please, let's emphasize that one.
just a bit of a slowing down is not a bad idea.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that with respect to the housing question and adaptation of the thing, I think there is a difficulty here of private property that's owned, not public lands. I listened to someone not too long ago from Forest and Bird about rivers, and of course a logical thing you can do with rivers is to provide a floodplain so the rivers don't be, such an amount of flooding. I've seen it in California where there's areas that the river can flow when the flood's high. And then I asked the obvious question, I guess. A lot of this land near the rivers is privately owned. So yes, you have an idea that can work really well to allow rivers to flood, but you have to acquire the land. It's not all publicly owned land. And I think your comments about building near the coast and all that, it comes kind of back to this privately owned land again. People invest in land and they want the right to do what they want to do. Excuse me. So I think probably in every country, but I think here in New Zealand in particular, where people are really hung up on owning a piece of land and wanting to do what they want to do with it, it could be quite an impediment to try to either purchase or implement some of these projects that would benefit the wider community, like the floodplain idea. So I'm just throwing it out there. I don't have any answer.
No, but you are pointing the right thing, and I think it connects with your point around having people discussing the issue together. Working on coastal areas, I'm often saying that the problem is not about identifying the solutions or the good options. We have hundreds of years of experience in controlling floods, even relocation in many Pacific islands for 1,000 years. They are used to move sometimes. So the problem is not about identifying the right options, the problem is about implementing them. This is exactly your point. And this is why we need a conversation. At one point, if the owners of some land, it's a hard conversation. This is what your neighbor pointed. There is a public thing and there is a private thing.
Right.
At one point, we will need to find a compromise or accept that the private thing takes precedence over the public thing. It can be a choice for a society. I don't want to live in this kind of society, but it could be a choice. But this has to be discussed. And this is the most difficult thing, actually. It's not about defining the engineering solutions or the nature-based solutions. I mean, we have a lot of information and experience on that. The question is, and this is what you pointed a good thing. It's not about, there is no silver bullet solution. I mean, each solution is designed depending on a context and on people in this context. That's all. Well, saying that it's easy, but I mean, you are posing the right question.
And this is why we've got we are good at understanding risk, we are good at making plans overall, we know how to make plans. Implementation is the tough one.
Done, but there might be time for a chat afterwards, so
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you so much for your